If you find yourself in need of legal representation, it can be a very stressful time in your life. In my career, I have dealt with thousands of lawyers, I've dealt with thousands of law firms, and I can confidently recommend to you Keith M. Davidson at kmdlaw.com. Available 24 hours, 7 days a week. Just log into kmdlaw.com. That's kmdlaw.com. Or you can call toll-free 833-4KMD-LAW. That's 833-4KMD-LAW. Personal injury, wrongful death, STDs, sexual assault, car accidents. They handle it all efficiently and professionally. It doesn't matter how imposing the opposition may be, because the team at kmdlaw.com are battle-tested and fierce. They will not stop until justice prevails. Go to kmdlaw.com or call toll-free 833-4KMD-LAW. If you're in for the fight of your life, stop screwing around and contact KMD Law. Thank you so much for listening to the Opperman Report. I want to welcome all our new listeners at WWPR 1490 AM in the Tampa Bay area. We're brand new down here. We're getting a nice warm welcome. We have great advertising opportunities for local sponsors, local businesses, but also international websites and international companies too. We're on our other stations in California, Nevada, Utah, and on the internet worldwide. But down here in Tampa Bay, Florida, we have some great opportunities for you to come in and get very, very affordable advertising rates. Get a hold of me at oppermanreport@gmail.com and we'll cut you a good deal. The Opperman Report is brought to you by aquadam.net. You can give them a call at 707-764-2119. A flooded home is never easy to deal with. You're left with the mess to clean up, the insurance companies to deal with, and not to mention all the memories, the precious memories that are lost in the flood. You can never replace those. And Aquadam can be a tool in your arsenal to protect your home and property from the floodwaters. The cofferdam is filled with water to control water and is reusable as long as it's taken care of. It can protect your home or business from rising floodwaters like a dam, but without the beavers. It can also be used in construction. If you need an area to be dewatered, an Aquadam can do the job. An Aquadam was used at SeaWorld in Orlando for the Mako roller coaster ride during the coaster's construction by dewatering the work area. An Aquadam is now dewatering the work area at San Antonio SeaWorld for their newest roller coaster ride. An Aquadam has been used in many construction projects all around the U.S. and all around the world. Now give Aquadam a call, 707-764-2119. You can look them up online at aquadam.net. You can find them on Facebook at Aquadam Inc. You call them up, you email them, you tell them Ed Opperman sent you, and they're going to take 10% off the price. Aquadam.net, 707-764-2119. Hey guys, if you like the show and you want to show your support, check out the Opperman Report Patreon. You can go there and become a member for $3 a month. We have all the shows that you hear Monday through Friday on AM/FM radio. We have all those shows, but we cut out the ads, so you can hear that content ad-free. There's a $5 section where we put up all the old members section shows are going up over there. And then there's a $10 section where we have brand new content. 8 hours of exclusive content per month goes up there in the $10 section. But listen, I put up a lot of free stuff too. We put up documents, court documents, photographs, announcements. So you should make the Opperman Report Patreon a stop. You should stop there once a day and check out what's going on over there. That's Opperman Report Patreon.
It's the Opperman Report. Join digital forensic investigator and PI Ed Opperman for an in-depth discussion of conspiracy theories, strategy of New World Order resistance, high-profile court cases in the news, and interviews with expert guests and authors on these topics and more. It's the Opperman Report. And now, here is investigator Ed Opperman.
Okay, welcome to the Opperman Report. I'm your host, private investigator Ed Opperman. You can find me at my website, emailrevealer.com, or at Opperman Investigations and Digital Forensic Consulting. Or you can just email me directly at oppermaninvestigations@gmail.com. If you like our show, be sure and check out our Patreon. We put up 8 new hours of content on Patreon each month. Or you can catch the shows that we play here on AM/FM radio Monday to Friday, but without the ads. We play them commercial-free on the Patreon if you sign up to become a member. If you want to check out our archives of past shows, we go to Spreaker.com. And that's where we have all the old shows. You go there, sign up for free. You get an email notification anytime I put up new content. There's a chat room. And also, too, I do an exclusive live Friday evening show there, just kind of homework and keeping people up with what's going on around here on Spreaker.com. Got a fascinating guest today. He's an artist, incredible artwork. It's beautiful stuff. You can go to his website, owencyclops.com. He also has a Patreon at Owen Cyclops. He has a podcast as well called Owen Broadcast, and the way to catch that is to go to his Twitter page, which is owenbroadcast.com. And he also uses the name Owen Cyclops. So, Owen, are you there?
I am here, and I'm happy to be here.
Thank you so much. We had a little trouble with the audio. Right, but we got through it. We muscled through that. Tell the audience, who is Owen Cyclops?
Yeah, well, I am mostly, I guess my primary function, my primary class that I occupy, you could say, is I'm an illustrator. So I do art. That's always been my main thing. And I think what makes me a little bit unique, I guess, distinguished in that area, is that I'm very interested in generally what I would call third eye, mystical, weird, paranormal topics. The arc of my journey is sort of inextricably interwoven into who I am. So I think it would be the shortest way to say it that I used to be the very stereotypical, doing a ton of psychedelics, really into New Agey, Buddhism, things like that. And then I transitioned over into being Christian after a while. And I think that gives me sort of a unique view on a lot of topics, having been really hard in that realm and then transferring over into the Christian realm. So I look at things like, society, culture, the aliens, Bigfoot, art in general, symbols in life, and how we sort of live life in these weird modern times. And that's the perspective I bring to it, having been a citizen of one island over there and then coming over to a separate shore, you could say.
And how would you describe your art?
Yeah, well, I usually call myself an illustrator as a very particular designator as opposed to a fine artist or a painter or something like that, because what an illustrator really does is they communicate and deal with ideas visually, and that's really what I do. So the artwork itself is a manifestation of me working with ideas and my own spiritual life and my ideas about things like that. And I would say that it is, if I meet someone on the street and they ask me, what kind of art I make, I normally say weird Christian art, if I had to put it in just a few words. For example, right here, I'm looking at my table and it's covered in this print I made of these different cryptids, and there's like an angel coming down from the sky, and there's all these different weird sort of monstrous creatures. So I think the art is a manifestation of me occupying those different zones, being into these atypical topics, viewing it through a theological lens, and also being really rooted in asking questions about, what it means to be in this weird world that we're all in now, where everyone's on social media and the Pentagon is talking about UFOs, and we have all this tech, and what does it all mean, but we still kind of feel like normal people, at least I do. So my art's a manifestation of me going deeper into all the topics that I'm interested in.
And I remember you said you came from like a psychedelic background. I forget what else you said too, like bohemian, guru type stuff, and you became a Christian. What is your? How would you describe your Christianity? What the fundamentalist? What's your denomination?
Yeah, I would say that I'm. Technically speaking, I don't belong to any denomination or group. When I first became Christian, I wanted to focus more on just figuring out my own situation as opposed to like joining up with any particular group. I guess I lean a little bit more towards the perspective of what I would say like more traditional forms of Christianity. I'm into a lot of Orthodox thinkers, a lot of like classical theologians and things like that, but I don't really belong to any group. I like to clarify that there is sort of a type of Christianity that is non-denominational, and they sort of are very into not being a part of a group. Not that there's anything wrong with that, but for me, I describe it as being incidentally non-denominational. I just happen to not be a part of any group, but yeah, that's basically the story. I'm sort of a floating character right now.
And did you have like a kind of a Paul Damascus Road experience, like a sudden conversion? Describe that.
Yeah, a little bit. I think it's really unexpected for people in some ways, but there is an archetype of someone who goes really far down the road of occultism and being into magic and these weird topics that eventually leads them into Christianity. It seems like it would be the most unintuitive connection ever. But that archetype does exist, and I do see myself as a part of that. I think you could explain it as, part of the draw of these weird esoteric spiritual paths and psychedelics and things like that is it feels like you're out in the field doing research. And I like to describe it as, sort of all my research unexpectedly led me to the conclusion of studying God and Christianity and things like that. It wasn't really one moment. It honestly was a little bit more like stumbling into a kind of conspiracy theory or something where I'm stacking up these cards and I'm looking at the evidence. And eventually I reached this point where I was looking at all this evidence and I thought, I kind of have to be a little dumb to think this is just all a total coincidence. So it wasn't really one moment. A lot of it was falling out with different things. I used to be really, really into psychedelics, and that was what all my art was about. I fell out of that. I used to be really into Buddhism, and eventually they led me to certain questions that led me directly to Christianity. So it's more of like a 1, 2, 3 step process.
So now, do you believe in the baptism of the Holy Spirit, the gifts, the spiritual gifts of tongues and prophecy and healing?
Yeah, I would say. Well, in a sense, there's a lot of things there. I mean, in a sense, yeah. I definitely believe in like the Holy Spirit and things like that. If you're talking about like speaking in tongues, that's a whole sort of like separate realm. But I don't do that. I don't really look down on it. But it's not really a part of my worldview, I would say.
And what about prophecy and words of knowledge, stuff like that?
Prophecy and things like that?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a big part of my vibe, I would say, is that I think people generally tend to view life as separated. There's a sort of a large barrier between the mundane and then the spiritual. And for me, a lot of the process of me developing and going deeper into these topics has been breaking down that wall. So, yeah, I really do think that, I actually believe in, like, divinity and things like that, and I think it intersects with real everyday life for sure.
Definitely. Now, what about now? Do you still use any kind of psychedelics or marijuana, anything now?
No, I don't. I think a big part of my general thesis, I guess you could say, I think the person that, set us up with each other, they read something I wrote that was all about DMT and psychedelics. And eventually I came to the conclusion that there is this larger, nefarious, unseen aspect to it operating under the surface. So I sort of naturally fell out of it, and then I really took a total 180 turn on it. If you told me, 10 years ago that I don't want to say I'm anti it. Saying anti makes it sound like you have like an irrational bias. But if you told me, 10 years ago that I would be talking to people sometimes about how I think there is this sort of darker, larger force at play via psychedelics and things like that, I would have been really surprised. But that's the conclusion I came to, yeah.
Now, the darker force you speak of, is this like the government, the MK Ultra programs and that kind of stuff? There's so many people, you know what I mean? Like so many people talk about how the LSD movement, like all these guys were a bunch of spooks that ran and all that stuff, and agents and all kind of provocateurs and such. Or you're talking about like a darker evil force that's behind it?
Yeah, so there is the whole, alphabet intelligence agencies, MK Ultra and stuff like that. Some people are really into that. For me, and I think part of what drew a lot of attention to me online initially, is that for me, I think there's certain connections that seem very unintuitive, but once you make them, they actually seem sort of obvious. So for me, when I say darker forces, I'm thinking more like spiritual forces and things like that. For example, I think that a lot of attention got drawn to me. I sort of had this whole thing I wrote that was about how all these different phenomenon that seem totally, completely separate are actually interlinked. And I really got the idea from someone named Seraphim Rose. He's an Orthodox monk. He was around in the 70s. And in my opinion, he was way ahead of the curve. He really saw everything coming, 100 miles away. In fact, if you even read him now, it still seems like he's still ahead of the curve. And he has a book that I'd highly recommend. It's called Orthodoxy and the Religion of the Future. And he goes through all these different topics like New Age stuff, UFOs, you mentioned speaking in tongues, all these different things, mostly like New Age stuff, UFOs, science fiction, things like that. And he views them from this Christian perspective. And when I first got exposed to him, it really blew my world wide open because I realized there were these underlying connections between these things that I had never considered. The easiest way to step into it, in my opinion, is really with the UFO thing. But a lot of people listening to this will obviously be familiar with UFOs, things like that. In fact, there's sort of a new wave of it with the government saying, oh, actually, we're releasing these videos, the Pentagon releasing videos about UFOs. If you trust the Pentagon, that's up to you, but they are releasing these videos, whatever they actually are. And I think the UFO thing is the best step into it in a way, because people have all these questions, what is it? Is it a hallucination? Is it just, are they actually aliens from other worlds or something like that? But what really started the cascade for me was Seraphim Rose says that the UFOs are obviously somewhat of a spiritual phenomenon, that they're not strictly these metal crafts literally landing on people's lawns, that the UFO phenomenon is an extension of this phenomenon of human beings encountering these strange, semi-spiritual creatures throughout history. And at first, it seemed like a really unintuitive connection to me. I thought, what does UFOs have to do with demons and stuff like that? What are you talking about? But as I went further into it, it really became the most plausible explanation for me. And that cascaded into all these other topics that I was into also, seeing them through a spiritual lens and realizing that they have a spiritual dimension to them.
And that's interesting, because then what do you make then of the government releasing these military videos now? And like you said, not that we could trust the military, because we know Colonel Michael Aquino was the head of the Templar set, and he was high up in the American military, running these psychological warfare operations. What do you make?
Yeah, that's a really great question. Honestly, I really don't know what to make of it, because on the surface level, I have to look at anything that they are releasing through some lens of skepticism, in the sense that I think when they release documents, a lot of the time the air they give them, the sort of facade is oh, well, the box was checked and now we just have to release this, so check it out. Now it's on the news. But obviously I think everyone knows that's not the case. If anything's released, it's with some level of intentionality. But beyond that, I really couldn't say specifically in terms of why now and why specific agencies or groups are releasing it. But for me, it's hooked back into a larger cultural shift. When I look at UFOs in and of themselves, this is a good example of it, but it works for a lot of topics. I really see them in terms of this whole worldview shift. And I think that UFOs play a really interesting role in that. In that it sort of represents this turn towards this kind of slightly atheistic, but also semi-New Age, scientific-y worldview that is almost like the default. That's why it's a little bit difficult to talk about the worldview as a whole, because, fish doesn't realize the water it swims in. But it's almost like the worldview is permeated by this strange blend of New Age, science, occultism, maybe transhumanism is in there also. And I see UFOs as, whether intentional or not, another chip stacked to shift things in that direction. So that just makes it more perplexing that, then the government would be also releasing these videos. But I couldn't say specifically why.
Well, the one thing we can be sure is we can't trust the government. And the other is that whole field seems to attract a bunch of hoaxers and con men, and just, I guess because a lot of the people who do want to believe in all kind of weird stuff are more gullible than the average person. And it just attracts these predators that goes out after these people. On the Owen broadcast, what other kind of topics do you cover on the Owen broadcast?
I talk about art and things like that, and symbolism, and sort of the way that symbols and symbolic thinking relate to life in general, how we live. It sounds very ambiguous, but I suppose what I mean is that a lot of the show that I do on YouTube, I do a YouTube show also,
right?
Is I do a painting show, and I'm painting and talking about it and things like that. And I think oddly it does actually sync up with all this other stuff, because there really is this symbolic dimension to life that not that many people are aware of, that we live through symbols, art, visuals. We even speak in visual language. Someone might say, do you see what I'm saying? Is what I'm saying clear? So I think that interacting directly with this symbolic dimension of life lets you see things a little bit more clearly, maybe more intentionally live and analyze your own worldview. So the way that art syncs up with thought and thinking and worldview, you could say, that's another big dimension to what I do.
And your Patreon, the Owen Cyclops Patreon, what kind of content do you put up there?
Yeah, so on my Patreon, I basically give people the backstage view of my art studio here. I suppose that's the other aspect of what I do in my little operation that I didn't talk about, but I live out in somewhere in rural America, somewhere undisclosed, and I have this art studio, and I basically make art all the time, full time. So I'm always making prints, I make shirts, cool graphics, I make comics also and things like that. So the Patreon is the behind the scenes view. So normal people see the front-facing stuff, all the art that comes out, and things like that. But on Patreon, I post, my sketchbook, work in progress, how things are developing. Basically, it's the behind-the-scenes view of my art studio here.
Yeah, that's interesting. When you started talking about living, deep woods, and making a full-time living off of art, the first thing that popped into my head was the Unabomber, And I found out recently that Greta Thunberg, that little girl, the climate change girl, is in communication with they're pen pals with the Unabomber, right? What do you make of that? And what do you make of this Unabomber? Well, put aside the bombing, his theory about technology and too much automation and development in our lifestyle.
Oh man!
Putting aside the bombing.
Well, yeah, no, of course, yeah. Well, I mean, of course, it goes without saying, but it's any sort of like political violence stuff. I have to. I do actually. I don't have to. I do. Disavow, of course. But in terms of his ideas, I think it's really interesting because I don't know if most people that would be listening to this would know, but he actually has a lot of writings on the way the technology would affect society theoretically, and then it actually happened that I think were crazy insightful. Actually, it's really odd that you bring it up. I do mention some things that at least one thing in particular that I picked up from his writings around people, and then when they say, "Oh, where'd you hear that?" Sometimes I say, "I don't know, I just picked it up somewhere." I don't tell them that it's from, Ted Kaczynski or something. But he has this idea, one in particular, that gets talked about in certain circles online, called over-socialization. And it's really interesting. Have you heard of over-socialization before?
No, I've never heard the expression before.
Oh, cool. Yeah, I love it. So it's a great example. It's one of these like little mental tools that you can pick up, a little sort of almost like a little picture you can pick up and then see it. Once you know what it looks like, you can see it out in real life. So we're all familiar with socialization. I think I'm pretty well socialized. You seem pretty well socialized, So if we were hanging out and I brought you around with some of my friends, I wouldn't really worry about you being poorly socialized. We could hang out. I could be pretty safely assured that you would adhere to at least some level of social norms. You could do the same with me. And we probably know some people that are poorly socialized, or we can at least imagine someone who is poorly socialized. And then if we brought them around to people, we might be worried that they're going to transgress these social norms, right? So there's a spectrum of socialization. You can be poorly socialized, you can be well socialized, but then it also goes further down that spectrum, and you can be over socialized. There's someone that can be socialized too much. And in my opinion, that's a huge aspect of what we're dealing with now, where the consequence of that is that you exist too much within whatever you perceive the social norms to be. And if anyone transgresses what you perceive the social norms to be, it basically sets off like these crazy red alarm bells, and you don't know how to act when someone transgresses anything that you perceive as a social norm at all. And I think that's a really useful idea because, in my opinion, anyone that has any ideas whatsoever, no matter what it is, that aren't, what the normal things you're supposed to be thinking are, has probably encountered that phenomenon where you're talking about something and you just happen to say something that's not even that controversial, just something maybe a little out of the ordinary. And sometimes you can actually see on people's faces, these red alarm bells go off. And if you try and engage with it logically and you say, oh, I'm not saying anything crazy, like I was just saying X, Y, and Z, you can't, because it's an emotional reaction in their mind. They have seen you go off the rails of, the little like roller coaster, the little rails of socialization. You've gone off the path, and they're basically smashing the alarm bell. I think probably anyone that has any controversial or even not normal ideas whatsoever is familiar with that, but it's kind of often difficult in the moment to pin it down. But that idea, for example, which he talked about, he's actually the one that coined that term over socialization, and that was all the way back then. I think that's a huge aspect of what we're dealing with in general, I would say. And then it syncs up with tech also. It goes on and on and on.
That's fascinating because I'm dealing with something in my personal life. I get involved in a lot of behind-the-scenes 24-hour news stories over the years, many, many things. And so I'll be sitting down, with the dinner table there, And I'll say, well, that's what they say on CNN, but here's what really happened. Like the Hunter Biden laptop. I know the whole story about what's behind that. And people kind of you're right. They can't, they have a reaction that they just can't, they freak out. A switch goes off, and they just can't accept it.
Yeah. I mean, honestly, that's unintentionally, that's been a huge part of my, I guess, I don't want to say development, but it's been a huge part of my, I guess work sounds pretentious also. It's a huge part of my vibe, I'll say, keeping it casual, is figuring out what the deal is with all of that. Because I used to live in New York. I don't tell people where I live now, but I used to live in New York. And I feel like around 2015, 2016, 2017, you could literally feel this type of, exactly what we just described. You could feel this sort of new level of over-socialization descend on the populace. And I really felt that shift. All of a sudden, I've always been kind of a crazy ideas guy, maybe obviously. And it used to be, you have some crazy ideas and people are like, oh, there's Owen, with his crazy ideas. But we crossed a certain point where all of a sudden that wasn't the reaction I was getting. The reaction I was getting was more fear and anger. Right. And just really terror. Terror is the perfect word, because terror combines a kind of like fight or flight with fear and anger. And I was really confused, and I was getting it from everyone around me. And I started trying to figure it out. And that's really a huge part of how I became who I am. I mean, that's part of why I'm anonymous also, is because when I talk about anything like that, I have to be able to speak freely, and everyone, almost everyone, maybe not, 5% of the population, but almost everyone has certain topics where if you touch those topics, they will kick on those red alarm bells. And that's initially why I became anonymous as an artist. I thought I have to be able to address and talk about everything to figure this out. And that's a big part of how it all started, yeah.
So now, have you had problems with stalkers?
No, nothing like that. But it's more to shield against this kind of, how would you describe it? People, it's almost like there's this, there's so many things that we don't really have language for yet that we're sort of figuring out the language for. But it's almost like a mental, it's not really a labyrinth, but there's this network of signs and signifiers and basically arrows pointing to each other that essentially everyone is enmeshed in. And I think it's really, really easy for things to spin out of control and people to get the wrong idea. Like you were just saying, like you're at some party and you say, yeah, well, the news said this, but really, what really happened is this. And someone hears you say that and they say to someone else, hey, that guy, like he thinks the news is not real. He thinks the news is fake. And then someone else tells someone else, that guy thinks that like, and then it spirals out of control and all of a sudden you're getting phone calls like, Brian said that you think like lizard people run, the Federal Reserve, which maybe that's true. I don't care. But the point is that things really spiral out of control really quickly. And that's part of why I did that. I can't like go around being concerned that if I say the wrong thing about some random topic that it's going to blow back into like my real life. Although oddly, this has become my real life. Now this is more my real life than anything else. But yeah, it's mostly a shield against, things like that. Things sort of getting out of control, you could say.
And just to be clear, we all know that it's snake people that run the Federal Reserve. We don't want to mislead the audience.
I was like, this is a bad example because that's actually true.
But it's fascinating because this is something that drives me crazy because this will be like a case I'm working on. This is what I go to work and I'm working on this case, and someone's watching on the news and they think they know more about it than I do. It's my story. It's my case. It's my job.
Yeah.
It's a disconnect. Now, we're going over time, but I want to ask you a question. Do you think this is by design? Or is this just a society out of control, running out of control?
I think it's a few complex factors dovetailing together perfectly. I used to work with a lot of like Asian art, actually, to make an odd parallel. And sometimes they have these joints where, 10 different pieces of wood will all come together and fit perfectly together to make one joint. And I think it's really like that. There's these, historical factors and then things that are loaded into the worldview that kind of have spiraled out of control. Some of it's probably intentional. A lot of it is people's emotion or inability to think at like a meta level and analyze their worldview. So I think it's a few complex factors dovetailing together. I mean, I could be more specific, but yeah, that's kind of my overall large-scale picture of it.
Because, like, I'm thinking, and clearly with the data mining that happens online with us these days, they can predict what we want to buy, and even before we know we want to buy it, or we're going to our next move. But some of the people I'm thinking of they're not online. They're not online at all. They don't even have smartphones, and still, TV is doing it to them, I guess. You think?
Yeah, I mean, the thing is, I've spent like years of my life banging my head against that wall.
Okay.
Where you just want to climb into someone's brain and say, wait, where did you get that specific term? Where did you get that specific idea? Like, who put this in here? Yeah, I think a lot of it has to do with worldview and the way that it kind of fits with what we were talking about before. Like the way that a worldview, I guess, people kind of think of it as like a few things maybe sitting on a table, a few ideas, a few concepts, but it's actually loaded back, and all those things have huge threads and arrows, and it's almost more like a big, like, what's that game, like Mousetrap, where or like a Rube Goldberg machine, So I think that's how you really get those results, where someone, like you just said, you're not on Facebook, you're not online, but you can feed the information into it and reliably have a dependable outcome for how it's going to come out, because how things are determined is set by the worldview. One analogy that I use a lot is, people kind of tend to operate on this level where they think, information, politics, sociology, theology, all this stuff, or anything complicated, operates on this level where, I found evidence. Here's a bloody knife. Therefore, there's a murder, like 1, 2, 3. But really, all evidence is interpreted in terms of a worldview. And I think that's how you get those confusing results, where you find someone, and like I just said, he's not hooked into the information sphere, but you still get the same result out because they're already loaded with the worldview.
Fascinating stuff. We're talking to Owen Cyclops. Got to take a little commercial break, but you can get a little taste of what this guy's about. You can check out his podcast, Is Owen Broadcast, and I think he releases those on Twitter. I'm still not quite sure how all this works.
Yeah, just to be clear, just to clarify, I have a Twitter. That's the main place I post, and then I do a show on YouTube, and then I do art also. So it's those sort of three things together.
What's the name of the show on YouTube?
It's called Ophanim Painting Hour. Ophanims are these biblical angels, so it's called Ophanim Painting Hour. But my Twitter is the main hub, and then if you're not on Twitter, my website, owencyclops.com, would be the other main hub. Yeah.
And don't forget the Patreon, Owen Cyclops on Patreon too as well. We'll be right back with more of Owen Cyclops after these messages. And now a word from our sponsors. If you find yourself in need of legal representation, it can be a very stressful time in your life. In my career, I have dealt with thousands of lawyers, I've dealt with thousands of law firms, and I can confidently recommend to you Keith M. Davidson at kmdlaw.com. Available 24 hours, 7 days a week. Just log into kmdlaw.com. That's kmdlaw.com. Or you can call toll-free 833-4KMD-LAW. That's 833-4KMD-LAW. Personal injury, wrongful death, STDs, sexual assault, car accidents. They handle it all efficiently and professionally. It doesn't matter how imposing the opposition may be, because the team at kmdlaw.com are battle-tested and fierce. They will not stop until justice prevails. Go to kmdlaw.com or call toll-free 833-4KMD-LAW. If you're in for the fight of your life, stop screwing around and contact KMD Law. The Opperman Report is brought to you by Aquadam.net. You can give them a call at 707-764-2119. A flooded home is never easy to deal with. You're left with the mess to clean up, the insurance companies to deal with, and not to mention all the memories, the precious memories that are lost in the flood. You can never replace those. And Aquadam can be a tool in your arsenal to protect your home and property from the floodwaters. The cofferdam is filled with water to control water and is reusable as long as it's taken care of. It can protect your home or business from rising floodwaters like a dam, but without the beavers. It can also be used in construction. If you need an area to be dewatered, an Aquadam can do the job. An Aquadam was used at SeaWorld in Orlando for the Mako roller coaster ride during the coaster's construction by dewatering the work area. An Aquadam is now dewatering the work area at San Antonio SeaWorld for their newest roller coaster ride. An Aquadam has been used in many construction projects all around the U.S. and all around the world. Now give Aquadam a call, 707-764-2119. You can look them up online at aquadam.net. You can find them on Facebook at Aquadam Inc. You call them up, you email them, you tell them Ed Opperman sent you, and they're going to take 10% off the price. Aquadam.net, 707-764-2119. Thank you so much for listening to the Opperman Report. I want to welcome all our new listeners at WWPR 1490 AM in the Tampa Bay area. We're brand new down here. We're getting a nice warm welcome. We have great advertising opportunities for local sponsors, local businesses, but also international websites and international companies too on our other stations in California, Nevada, Utah, and on the internet worldwide. But down here in Tampa Bay, Florida, we have some great opportunities for you to come in and get very, very affordable advertising rates. Get a hold of me at oppermanreport@gmail.com and we'll cut you a good deal. Emailrevealer.com. People ask me all the time, hey Ed, are you still a private investigator? I sure am. Go to emailrevealer.com. We handle adoption investigations, infidelity investigations, where you give us your spouse's email address. We trace it back to online dating websites, catch them cheating online. Email tracing, locate or identify somebody from as little as an anonymous email address. Someone owe you money? Back child support? We can find that deadbeat, locate his hidden assets, locate his hidden bank accounts, find his current place of employment, and even assist you in obtaining a judgment and recover that judgment for you. Emailrevealer.com. Digital forensics, computer forensics, cell phone forensics, recover deleted text messages. Create a report that you can use in court. Emailrevealer.com. 800-572-9762.
Before Epstein was the Franklin cover-up. Before that, the Finders. And long before that, the Cleveland Street Scandal. Pedogate Primer is a concise intro and overview of a growing child abuse epidemic worldwide. It features shocking instances of institutionalized and organizational pedophilia throughout history. Churches, cults, the world of arts and entertainment, the government, NGOs, charities, and major corporations are all complicit or culprits in many instances. Pedogate Primer delves into material that for many may seem like the stuff of conspiracy theories. For this reason, the book draws on academic resources, declassified documents, and other reliable sources, and steers clear of conjecture. Such shocking true stories need no embellishment.
It's the Opperman Report. And now, here is investigator Ed Opperman.
Okay, welcome back to the Opperman Report. I'm your host, private investigator Ed Opperman. We're here today with a fascinating guy. He calls himself Owen Cyclops, and he's off the grid someplace, his secret location in an underground lair with Bin Laden's ghost. His podcast is called Owen Broadcast. Yeah, Owen Broadcast. You can find it. You can find that from his Twitter account, which is Owen Cyclops at Owen Broadcast. You can find him on owencyclops.com, and his Patreon is Owen Cyclops. Now, just a minute ago, off the air, you were trying to explain to me, I guess, this journey that you took involving Bigfoot and 411, missing 411, and DMT. Tell us what you wanted to tell me.
Yeah, so I thought it would be interesting. It's one of the things that I've written that definitely blew up the most and got the most attention online.
Okay.
It's a little bit of a meandering walk, but I mean, that's what part of what the radio story form is for, I guess.
Yeah.
But long story short, I was always into different paranormal, strange phenomenon like we were just talking about. And I had always written off things like aliens. We brushed on that for a second, and you mentioned, something about it, with the military and things like that. But one of the things that really roped me into it was, I don't think most people in the general population are aware of this, but there's a lot of data on how people react and the long-term effects of them encountering UFOs. I had initially written it off because I thought, people could just be telling these stories. You mentioned it attracts like charlatans, people trying to sell their book and stuff like that. But I saw this data, some of it from Harvard and these supposedly reputable institutions. And one of the ones that really stuck with me was people who have these abduction experiences. Basically, you can hook them up to, machines and measure their sweat and their heart rate and stuff. And when they talk about their experiences, they have the same level of repeated sort of physical trauma, like sweating and elevated heart rate, that people experience when they go to war and come back and talk about their war stories. So for the people, whether, these aliens and stuff are real or not, they actually do experience it as real trauma. So I found that and I thought, that's really weird, or it's really strange. And I looked into how many of these, alien encounters there are, and the story itself kind of started to unravel for me, because people think of aliens as coming from these other worlds. They're super advanced, with their technology and everything. But I was thinking, if that's the case, why do they have to abduct people and traumatize them? It's just kind of a really strange piece of data. At the same time, we were talking just over the break, about missing 411. In case people don't know, there's a ton of disappearances in national parks. It's really, really strange. People disappear in these clusters. And the details of those stories are really strange also. You'll get these stories where people, at first you think, someone disappeared in a national park, right? That makes perfect sense. But you get these details like someone will walk out onto a frozen lake and they'll find their footprints and then boom, they're just gone. The footprints just almost like they're lifted up in the air. And there's these patterns, people disappear around boulders, these circles of boulders, people will just vanish. It's usually around twilight. And there's all these little weird details, like, they'll find people's shoes. They find their shoes all the time. It's often hunters. And I started looking at all this data, and I thought, this is really strange, because if this was just random stuff happening, why would you expect these clusters of data? Why would it always be around boulders? Why would it always be people who were, picking berries and, all these little weird patterns coming up? And the thing that really clicked in my mind is I realized that a lot of the patterns there, and also working backwards, a lot of the patterns in the alien abduction stuff are also patterns from mythology and different cultural lore from different cultures. I don't know if most people know, but fairies, seems like a really weird jump, but fairies in cultural lore aren't really like Tinkerbell in Disney movies. Stories about fairies involve these like strange lights luring people off the path, and people get like abducted by fairies, and they go to these, I'm talking about cultural stories and folklore and things like that, and they get taken to these strange realms where time passes really quickly, and they come back. And a lot of those details synced up perfectly with the missing 411 disappearances. People picking berries, that's a fairy thing. That's why if you go to certain countries, like in parts of Ireland, they'll say, you shouldn't pick certain plants. They belong to the fairies, Things like the boulders, these creatures are said to live in boulders and they abduct people. Hunters, people messing with the animals. Twilight, dusk is like a classic magical time where weird things happen. So it really accelerated my studies because I realized that all this stuff fit together in this weird cohesive framework, and that I wasn't really the only one who noticed it. There's other UFO researchers and people studying paranormal phenomenon who naturally look backwards and say, oh, look, these patterns are the same. How strange is that? And the reason it really kicked into high gear for me is my background doing psychedelics. To make a long story short, I've basically done as much, I would say I've gone as far down that road as someone could go without really altering their life drastically. Like maybe some people go live in some, weird compound or something. I didn't do that, but I did, a lot of DMT, ayahuasca, and things like that. And it's just relevant because I don't know if everyone knows this, but the thing there is that DMT itself is essentially the most powerful psychedelic that exists. It's tiers beyond, like levels and levels and levels beyond other psychedelics that have been in our culture or in other cultures. So that in and of itself is interesting because right now it's breaking so hard in the culture. I keep up with it. I don't know if other people do, but it's so normal that even people like Lindsay Lohan and Vice Media, everyone's talking about ayahuasca and DMT. It's everywhere, basically. So you have to ask yourself, if you look back at the 60s and the 70s and the big effect, acid and things like that had on the culture, right now you're basically at the beginning of the wave breaking of something much larger, which is DMT and ayahuasca being released into Western culture wholesale. I mean, Joe Rogan has like the most popular podcast in the world, right? And he talks about it all the time, tells people to do it, they should do it. So I think the effects of that are just starting. And the reason that it is relevant, again, to everything I just described working backwards, is that the hallmark of those experiences, people doing DMT, doing ayahuasca is basically orally active DMT, kind of just going through this quickly. We can go back and I can elaborate on anything, but just to paint the whole picture, make it not this weird, like, kind of schizo web. The point is that those experiences are characterized by being transported to other worlds, interacting with entities. It's a totally, fully immersive psychedelic experience. Like if you've seen cartoon shows where someone does drugs and everything, they go to some other world and something and people say, oh, it's not really what drugs are like. That's actually what like DMT and ayahuasca are like. So the point is that I had built up all this, understanding of how these other phenomena are related via these archetypes and themes and patterns. And I realized that it's the same exact thing as DMT and ayahuasca and those patterns. And it just formed this really strange picture that I feel like I am almost at the tip of the spear of putting together, not because of some like great knowledge I have, just because of by virtue of having walked through these different rooms. Not many people, I think, have gone through all the different rooms that I've gone through at this point. because it's just really strange that when people are taking this drug that's from the Amazon rainforest, I mean, people talk about seeing aliens, the patterns from fairy lore and things like that. So I'm kind of just going through it quickly just to make sure that I sort of paint the whole cohesive web, because for me, that's where I'm standing, and that's where a lot of my work is, in kind of trying to figure out, like, what's the deal with that? Why is it that when people do these, like, newer in the sense of being now placed into our culture, psychedelics, it forms this perfect tapestry with all these other weird paranormal phenomenons, like people seeing the same things, the same sort of themes running through them. And I really started to realize that the only way I could really explain all of this is within a larger, like, theological framework. And all of a sudden it made perfect sense. If you look at all the missing 411 stuff, you literally can't explain it in terms of physical phenomena. You can't look at someone who literally just vanishes from the earth and try and explain it in terms of purely physical stuff. It obviously is something super physical. It has this super physical spiritual component. Same deal with the UFOs. You can't really explain it in terms of purely physical phenomenon. And yeah, basically a big part of my breakthrough, I guess you could say, and I wrote this whole thing that's basically a longer version of what I'm describing right now, painting this whole picture of all this integrated together, is that all these things have like a spiritual dimension to them. And I think, not to be too dramatic to shove it in this large nutshell, but I really think it has to do with like spiritual warfare and spiritual evil and good battling for the attention and control and fate of humanity. Not to be over dramatic, but you mentioned the UFOs and why would the government disclose it and things like that. Now I see things like that in terms of this larger picture, in terms of turning people's attention towards whatever is going on, if that makes sense.
Yeah, at the same time, this big push to legalize marijuana, which is brand new.
Yeah, totally.
Brand new, just have it.
Yeah.
Now, another thing, too, you had mentioned, too, about missing 411. Back in Nevada, there was this fascinating case where this group of hikers, and I think it was 3 of them, took all their clothes off, folded them up neatly with their shoes on top of the clothes, and then disappeared. And what they try and say was, and at the time I kind of believe this, they said that when you're dehydrated and you're getting heat stroke in the desert, you think if you take your clothes off and you run real fast, it'll cool you off. Now, I don't know how they can come up with that.
Yeah, that's pretty common. Yeah, people who, I don't know, in the desert, I guess you would get hypothermia in the desert, but yeah, the last stage of it is you feel really, really hot, and that you want to desperately, like, remove your clothing and then to try and, like, get rid of the hot, but it's actually an illusion because you're, like, super cold, yeah.
Back to you for a minute. Now, are you living in isolation right now, or are you living with, like, a family or a girlfriend or something?
No. I have a wife, I have a dog, and things like that.
Okay.
But, I like to say that basically I have one foot in normal life to the extent that I don't want to say have to, because I love it. Love my wife, love my dog, and everything. But then everything else is, all my energies and everything with the art, writing, all of that is basically dedicated to kind of just figuring out what the deal is with all this stuff. Not like this stuff. I mean, the way we've been talking so far, it makes it sound like I probably have my walls covered in, like, UFO documents. It's not really like that. That's just a nice node to hit to illustrate it. How all this stuff figures into, good and evil, the rapidly changing, like, world that we live in. Because I think a lot of people just think, like, oh, the world changes, that's kind of how it is, But I don't really see it that way anymore. I think that the larger worldview shift is somehow hooked into all these little weird bits of data and evidence, and kind of trying to get more people to just also look at it and figure it out with me, because I'm not some, Da Vinci-esque genius. I think that right now we're kind of at the, like I said, tip of the spear, where people are going to start realizing, something's kind of up with, like, all this new age stuff, and why do I go to, this store at the mall to buy clothes for my sister, and there's, like, tarot cards here? Isn't that, like, kind of weird? And I turn on Vice News and they're telling me to do ayahuasca, and BuzzFeed News is telling me to, like, try DMT. Like, something's clearly going on. It's not all just random, basically.
And these bizarre ceremonies at the halftime show and at the Grammys and stuff that was with Baphomet.
Yeah.
Something's right in your face,
Exactly. And then everywhere you turn, you hit this, it's like there's a vector towards this dark energy, this dark symbolism that I wrote off for a long time. I thought, maybe it's just a coincidence. It's just, people being weird. I was in the art world, so people, like weird symbols and things like that. But I really do think that there's, like, spiritual forces at play for sure.
Oh yeah, because some of the stuff is embedded very, deeply, so that you don't even notice it. Now, I forgot what I was going to ask you. Even the music industry too. Now, do you think, again, this Satanism is this by design, like Satanism?
Well, yeah, the question of like if it's by design is very interesting. I think that in general, most people are kind of loaded to put it into a binary, it being, anything. A binary of, well, either there's a bunch of people in a room planning this out, or it's totally random. I don't really see it that way. I think that most people are influenced almost like, not to sound like Illuminati-esque, it's not like that, but almost they're influenced, like puppets on a string by their worldview and how they see things. That's the case for me. It's the case for everyone. So when you see some music video, let's say, where someone, one came out recently and it made sort of a big stir online where someone's like, dancing, they're like giving a lap dance to like Satan or something like that. Literally, by the way, so absurd. And you can ask yourself, why is that? And some people would say, well, this guy works for the music industry. Someone obviously told him to, put this devil imagery in his video. Maybe that's the case, yeah. But I think it's more that the momentum and energy is so loaded towards things like that it sort of just naturally happens. I mean, I would say I see the larger shift in terms of the Christian worldview basically taking a back seat. I mean, we live in like a quote unquote, post-Christian world, as much as I dislike it. And the question people should ask themselves is what's replacing that? If we live in a post-Christian world, what's replacing it? It's not nothing. And it's this strange hybrid of, sort of the other thing, I guess, that's a part of my work, I guess you could say, is it's a really strange hybrid of occulty stuff, occult energy, occult views and things like that, with what I guess I would call a sort of scientific atheism. And those two things seem like they should be the worst enemies. It seems like, weird ideas about crystals and magic and astrology and things like that should be the number one enemy, right, of scientific atheism. Like one's rational, one's mystical. They should be opposing, right? But they're really not. They really go together, actually, to make one cohesive worldview. And you could go back in history and document that. I mean, if you go back even like to the birth of all that stuff and like not the birth, but in our culture, one of the big nodes of it in the Renaissance, right? The Renaissance wasn't just a birth of like humanism and rationality. There was also the occult and esoteric stuff having a reflourishing. One of my favorite little examples of that is this guy, Pico Mirandola. He wrote the first treatise on humanism. It's a whole thing about humanism. It's like the Humanist Manifesto. But he also got excommunicated from the church for being like a Kabbalist, and working really hard with occult, magic, and stuff like that. So in a weird way, I think that also contextualizes sort of a long walk, but the music industry and all that stuff. It's like it's loaded with all these different building blocks of like atheism, which is inherently anti-Christian, occult stuff. Everyone thinks occult stuff is so cool. So when I see stuff like that, I think of it more as like a symptom rather than the cause. That's how I would say it. It's more like the society at large is infected with something. And then I'm like, well, yeah, of course, when you turn on MTV, people are like killing each other and, simulating sex acts with the devil. Of course that would happen. Because
or Adult Swim, a Cartoon Network, Adult Swim, which is involved with Kenneth Anger, by the way. Let's not look at that. Now, I don't even have time to ask you a question. We're totally out of time. We got about 1 minute and 40 seconds. What would you like to leave us with?
What I would like to leave people with is you have to ask yourself the question of what is this new, strange worldview that everyone seems to suddenly be a part of? Is it atheist? Is it magic? What's the deal? It's kind of this weird thing that has no name yet, and we have to name it so we can figure out what the implications are and how it's going to play out long term.
Owen Cyclops, thank you so much. You can be found on Twitter at Owen Broadcast or Owen Cyclops. His Patreon is Owen Cyclops. And his website is owencyclops.com. And once again, what's the name of that YouTube channel?
On YouTube, it's Ophanim Painting Show. But yeah, the best hub is on Twitter. It's at Owen Broadcast. If you're not on Twitter, just go to my website, owencyclops.com. That's how you can find me or keep up with me.
Owen, thank you so much.
Yeah, man. Thanks for having me.
And now a word from our sponsors. Hey guys, if you like the show and you want to show your support, check out the Opperman Report Patreon. You can go there and become a member for $3 a month. We have all the shows that you hear Monday through Friday on AM/FM radio. We have all those shows, but we cut out the ads, so you can hear that content ad-free. There's a $5 section where we put up all the old member section shows are going up over there. And then there's a $10 section where we have brand new content. 8 hours of exclusive content per month goes up there in the $10 section. But listen, I put up a lot of free stuff too. We put up documents, court documents, photographs, announcements. So you should make the Opperman Report Patreon a stop. You should stop there once a day and check out what's going on over there. That's Opperman Report Patreon. The Opperman Report is brought to you by Aquadam.net. You can give them a call at 707-764-2119. A flooded home is never easy to deal with. You're left with the mess to clean up, the insurance companies to deal with, and not to mention all the memories, the precious memories that are lost in the flood. You can never replace those. And Aquadam can be a tool in your arsenal to protect your home and property from the floodwaters. The cofferdam is filled with water to control water and is reusable as long as it's taken care of. It can protect your home or business from rising floodwaters like a dam, but without the beavers. It can also be used in construction. If you need an area to be dewatered, an Aquadam can do the job. An Aquadam was used at SeaWorld in Orlando for the Mako roller coaster ride during the coaster's construction by dewatering the work area. An Aquadam is now dewatering the work area at San Antonio SeaWorld for their newest roller coaster ride. An Aquadam has been used in many construction projects all around the U.S. and all around the world. Now give Aquadam a call, 707-764-2119. You can look them up online at aquadam.net. You can find them on Facebook at Aquadam Inc. You call them up, you email them, you tell them Ed Opperman sent you, and they're going to take 10% off the price. Aquadam.net, 707-764-2119. If you find yourself in need of legal representation, it can be a very stressful time in your life. In my career, I have dealt with thousands of lawyers, I've dealt with thousands of law firms, and I can confidently recommend to you Keith M. Davidson at kmdlaw.com. Available 24 hours, 7 days a week. Just log into kmdlaw.com. That's kmdlaw.com. Or you can call toll-free 833-4KMD-LAW. That's 833-4KMD-LAW. Personal injury, wrongful death, STDs, sexual assault, car accidents. They handle it all efficiently and professionally. It doesn't matter how imposing the opposition may be, because the team at kmdlaw.com are battle-tested and fierce. They will not stop until justice prevails. Go to kmdlaw.com or call toll-free 833-4KMD-LAW. If you're in for the fight of your life, stop screwing around and contact KMD Law. Hey, if you have something you want to promote, like a business or a website, you got a big event coming up, consider advertising on the Opperman Report. We have excellent advertising rates for you. We're on KCAA on 3 different frequencies on AM/FM in California, KSHP, 1400 AM, Nevada, WWPR in Florida, the Tampa Bay area, 1490 AM, and also WWNN, which is on the east coast of Florida, all the way from Miami up to Port Bay, 175 miles of I-95. The advertising rates are very affordable. Once your ad goes up and we play the show on the podcast and on the YouTube channel, those ads stay up there forever. And then we play repeats every single night of classic Opperman Report shows. And your new ads will be inserted into those repeats that play every single night. So the saturation is incredible and the rates are very affordable. Contact me at oppermanreport@gmail.com. Hey guys, if you like the show and you want to show your support, check out the Opperman Report Patreon. You can go there and become a member for $3 a month. We have all the shows that you hear Monday through Friday on AM/FM radio. We have all those shows, but we cut out the ads, so you can hear that content ad-free. There's a $5 section where we put up all the old members section shows are going up over there. And then there's a $10 section where we have brand new content. 8 hours of exclusive content per month goes up there in the $10 section. But listen, I put up a lot of free stuff too. We put up documents, court documents, photographs, announcements. So you should make the Opperman Report Patreon a stop. You should stop there once a day and check out what's going on over there. That's Opperman Report Patreon.